Neilson to start off a full day of learning and networking. I'm Tiffani Neilson, and with me is the CEO and founder of IoT Marketing, Johannes Beekman. How are you doing today, Johannes?
I'm doing great, Tiffany. How are you?
Fantastic. And produced by IoT Marketing and Industry Insights webinars, this highly anticipated virtual event promises a convergence of brilliant minds through panel discussions, keynotes, and fireside chats. We have brought together a very exciting lineup of speakers from around the world to explore how IoT and other emerging technologies can drive green initiatives and pave the way for a sustainable future. To tell you more about today's agenda, following this opening panel discussion, we will follow it with some sessions revolving around IoT, then AI, and later this afternoon, energy, followed by sustainability. And thank you so much to all of our sponsors and media partners: Knowledge Reactor AI, Abundant IoT, Triodos, VideoBot, Coruzant, IoT Insights, and IoT for All. For anyone watching the opening live stream that does not yet have their all access ticket, you can still join us within the event platform for the entire event to take advantage of all the advanced networking features, ask questions, engage with us in the chat, as well as explore our virtual expo hall. And attendees will delve into the latest green tech solutions, witnessing their profound impact on our planet. You'll discover how IoT optimizes processes, reduces energy usage, and empowers the transition to renewable sources. Explore real-world use cases, and these showcase the power of these innovations and gain invaluable insights from industry experts that are spearheading the sustainable revolution. And we still have a limited supply of free passes available, so get yours now at IoTMKTG. Are you excited, Johannes? And what are you most looking forward to about today's event?
Oh, I'm always excited and looking forward to the Green Thing Summit, Tiffany. And well, you know, of course, this is the fourth iteration of, we started 4 years ago, and we started calling it Green Thing Summit a couple of years ago. But sustainability, and that's the main theme of today, is such an important concept. And we define it as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. What a revolutionary concept. And it affects so many industries and sectors. It has even spawned industries and subsectors, just as renewable energy, wind, solar, etc., green building technologies, and sustainable agriculture. I can't wait to hear more about these developments at the summit.
Excellent, Johannes. Thank you so much. And without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our fellow panelists. And now for our panelists. First, we have Bill Pugh, the managing partner at Smart Connections Consulting. How are you today, Bill?
I'm doing great, Tiffany. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And we also have Rob Tiffany, the founder of Continuous. How are you doing today, Rob?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Good to see you, Tiffany.
Great to see you as well. Thank you both for joining us today for the Green Things Summit. And when we talk about green, what exactly do we mean by green? Well, we'll walk through several examples throughout the event of ways that IoT and other emerging technologies such as AI are used to create more sustainable and energy efficient. Wait, hang on. I totally butchered that. Okay.
Cut.
Cut. Okay. And what exactly do we mean by going green? Well, we'll walk through several examples today throughout the event of ways that IoT and other emerging technologies such as AI are used to create a more green and sustainable future. But Bill, what does green mean to you? And what are some examples of new developments and building green?
You know, I mean, what it really means immediately when I think about it is a level of sustainability, reducing carbon emissions, clean energy. All of these things kind of resonate when you mention, you know, green, going green. The buildings themselves are probably some of the largest culprits for CO2 emissions. And the energy consumption and things of that nature. So I think it's being more conscious with how we're building. So building, green buildings, literally meaning that your windows are not producing outgassing and things of that nature. There's a number of elements that I think of when we talk about going green. So sustainability, renewables, and clean energy.
Thank you, Bill. And Rob, another aspect of green is sustainability. And I know you have several sustainable development goals that you want to share with us today. And our food systems are an important aspect of being green, and agriculture is a common theme that you've shared with us during our Green Things Summits. And with that in mind, can you tell us about the second sustainable development goal, which is zero hunger, and how IoT and AI are helping to resolve this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. You probably hear stuff, you got to measure what matters, right? And if you can't measure it, you can't manage or improve things. And I think that's at the crux of what IoT does. And so when you're going after, so you have these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and there's 17 of them. And it occurred to me several years ago that IoT and analytics and AI and things like that could actually move the needle in some of those areas. And so what I try to do generally before going after any one of these is, you've got to make it simple for people. Like if you want people to go around the world and help save the planet, it can't be some hard, complex IoT thing that they don't understand. And so my mind, for whatever you're tackling, it's like I like to snap Lego blocks together, sensors, what's the kind of device, what kind of electricity you're using, because it might matter if you're outdoors or indoors, what kind of network do you have to use? Are you going to model it as a digital twin? What are your KPIs that you're measuring? What kind of analytics or AI do you need? What's the automation to take action on whatever the insight is? And what are people doing? Because nothing happens without people. And so when I think, if I drill in just on hunger, and no doubt about it, you're right. We've talked a lot about agriculture in the past. There's a lot of food waste that you probably read about all the time. And as I've probably mentioned before in past events, as we get to 2050, we might get to 9 or 10 billion people on this planet. And so we've got to increase food production or not lose food, as it turns out. When you think about food waste, as I've heard from growers before, we've got to create more food than we have since the beginning of farming. But it also turns out that right now, believe it or not, we actually produce enough food, but we're losing so much food waste, about 30% after harvest from a farm, like as soon as whatever it is you're harvesting, now it's got to go to market through that supply chain, right? And so that's about 1.3 billion tons a year that we lose. And so, what's that supply chain look like? It's getting them onto trucks, 18-wheelers, refrigerated. One of the oldest things we've ever talked about, right, in IoT was cold chain, right? That's an oldie but goodie, right? That's not rocket science, but it's important. And so making sure food harvested, when it's stored, monitoring it there, monitoring it in trucks. Turns out there's lots of intermediate players in that supply chain that things get handed off to on the way to the grocery store or the restaurant. And so there's a lot of opportunities for food to go bad along that way. And so as it turns out, if we do a better job using IoT and taking actions and not letting bad things get away from us, we can cut that food waste down dramatically and make a huge difference for folks, even in lieu of producing more food, which obviously we need to do that as well. So anyway, that's a great thing to tackle.
Thank you, Rob. And another way that we can do that is even in a smart refrigerator. So Johannes, one way that people are going more green and living a little smarter is in smart homes. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing when it comes to smart and sustainable living within the home?
Well, Tiffany, the list of smart home technologies is getting longer every year. But just to give you a few examples, now we're talking about smart thermostats, smart lighting, solar energy integrations, and of course, also home energy management systems, and even smart water controls. So we're getting closer and closer to the sentient homes that we wrote about in 2022.
Thanks, Johannes. And Bill, in order to power all of these connected solutions, or at least most of them, the ones that aren't wireless and battery operated, we need the grid. So this is a common topic. You've talked to us about this several times, but where are we with grid reliability? And can you share your thoughts on grid stability and its modernization?
I think we're making great strides. You're starting to see a lot more in terms of the utilities looking at both ends of the equation. So yes, there's generation. Yes, when everyone's, driving EVs and the likes, you're still using fossil fuels along those routes. But what you're starting to see is a bit more on the distributed energy resource side. You got more in terms of residential homes with solar enough. Before, it was never enough to get to net zero, but now they're actually seeing a lot more solar get to net zero, and consumers are starting to add storage. And once you start to have this proliferation of this much solar, bidirectional PV, and storage, you have the opportunity to actually create community energy storage. That community energy storage can help balance the grid when you have these peak demands that used to cause the utilities to have rolling brownouts. Well, now they don't have to do that. So I think we're seeing a strong movement towards modernization on the inside, that being the consumer, so the residential homeowner, as well as you're starting to see a lot more with the schools and them having solar across the board. So they create resilience hubs. And then on top of that, you're starting to see advanced distribution management systems, ADMS, being deployed by the utilities. This is allowing them to understand where the outages are going to happen based on historical data, and they can prevent these blackouts and brownouts because of the peak energy demand. So, it's going to take some time. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to solve it overnight. But you're definitely seeing the utilities engage not only with the end customers, but because of the infrastructure bill and the electrification drive, and all of these other things are kind of coalescing at the right time for us to experience some stability and greater manageability along the way.
So you're going to see perpetual improvements along the way, right, Bill? We're not going to see one massive overhaul. It's going to be perpetual.
No. It's gonna be somewhat. I won't say a hockey stick. It'll be a rise, a slow rise.
I like it. And Rob, another SDG that you wanted to highlight is Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is to ensure clean water and sanitation for all. Can you share how AI and IoT are assisting with that challenge?
Absolutely. Here's a quiz for the audience. What does the human body and the planet Earth have in common? We're both made up of 70% water. And so it's kind of a thing. But the sad thing is only 1% of all this water is drinkable on the whole Earth. And so you got about 1 in 10 people around the world that don't have access to safe, fresh water. And then the big thing when I think about what we can do in IoT, goes back to, and probably Johannes chimes in on this with the home too, is just that leak detection. But leak detection at a big scale. You could do it at a home, but you might be freaked out to find that, just in the United States alone, I think we lose about 6 billion gallons of fresh water every day, every single day leaking. There's a whole unseen world, and this is Bill's, area where, cities and stuff like that. There's this whole world underneath all the cities and all the neighborhoods and all the skyscrapers that's pipes and pumps everywhere moving water around. But most people just kind of think it's magic, kind of like back to the whole food thing. They think stuff appears at the grocery store magically, right? Well, we're leaking 6 billion gallons of fresh water in the US every day from all those pipes. There's something IoT could do about it. Obviously, we can measure moisture, we can measure pressure in pipes, we can measure flow in pipes, and then we can see where leaks are happening, and we can take action quickly. And then you can do, there's that notion of early warning. Let's nip it in the bud before it just starts leaking forever. Let's go attack it right away. But then, to your point, Tiffany, about AI, when the data from all those systems is being captured continuously, you can start turning a lot of those systems into AI models that you can train over time. And the model sees when things are good, but it also sees when things are bad or when a leak's going to happen, and so kind of in machine learning terminology, there's all these features, which are kind of elements, attributes of what that system is like. And the label that you're guessing for, you're doing a prediction, an AI prediction for, is it leaking? Is it not? And so that's why you want to do both. You want to have KPIs. You want to, when you find out something in real time, you want to get after it, but you also want to train models on that whole system so that you can predict, see a needle in a haystack that the typical human can't see, so we can go after those problems before they occur. So I think there's a lot of great stuff we could do there to help that leakage from happening.
Thank you very much, Rob. And we're seeing a lot of AIoT being used, especially when it comes to infrastructure. And so, Johannes, can you tell us a little more about AIoT and its role in intelligent infrastructure?
Well, AIoT is the brains behind intelligent infrastructure, Tiffany. We all know about smart meters, like we have one at our homes. These are IoT devices that track energy usage, helping cities and customers optimize consumption and save costs. We also have smart water meters, same deal, but what's really interesting, and Rob already alluded to that the more advanced meters, they have a feature called integrated acoustic leak detection. So with acoustic, ultrasonic, we can detect whether there is water leaking out of a pipe. And acoustic leak detection is a cutting edge technology that's being rolled out across all industries, and it has revolutionized the way we identify and manage leaks in various industries, including oil, gas, pipelines, industrial facilities, and also water lines. And we shouldn't forget predictive maintenance. That's where IoT really plays a big role. So using data collected by tiny sensors embedded in infrastructure, AI algorithms can predict where maintenance is needed on bridges, buildings, and other critical infrastructures.
Thanks, Johannes. And if you'd like to learn more about AIoT, we have a free download available from Knowledge Reactor AI on what makes AIoT special. And it's the V's of AIoT, a very interesting read, and it's available for free. You can download it in the chat or in the platform. So be sure to take a look at that if you'd like to learn more about AIoT. And Bill, I saw a post that you shared on LinkedIn, and you always get my mind stirring and wondering, like, and I saw the intelligent infrastructure economic zones. Can you tell us more about that? And I'd also love to hear more about where we are with electrification.
Sure. So the notion of intelligent infrastructure economic zones is one that's actually being driven collectively by the Autonomy Institute and Jeff DeCo. I work very closely with the Autonomy Institute, and what it's built on the fact that over the past 50 plus years, infrastructure has been just wildly thrown out. And now when you look at the opportunity that we have, a generational opportunity based on the infrastructure bill and what it wants to drive in terms of transformation across the board. You're talking about taking what would be a regular pole and allowing it to be a neutral host platform. You're looking at the fiber that's being laid in all of these areas that is being put in for charging stations and other electrification projects actually be extended so that it increases the opportunity for inclusive broadband. So you're solving for digital equity. You're laying the backbone for the data to be driven from all of these EV chargers. You're putting in new infrastructure that has the smarts in it to let you know what's happening. We could move it to over time to a level 5 of autonomy and actually have it drive decisions. But the big part about it for me is it's going to drive economic development. You're going to create jobs. You're going to have inclusive communities. You're going to allow those that don't have these things to actually benefit from the infrastructure that's being put into the built environment. And so the notion of economic zones and public-private partnerships is a reality and not just a concept anymore. And SH 130 in Austin is a perfect example of that, where there's some odd 90 miles of road being laid with fiber and 5G and charging stations, and then along that, everyone that does not have equitable broadband is receiving that broadband. So I think it's a tremendous effort. I think it's a blueprint for the rest of North America to actually look at, watch, and get behind it, and it's replicable anywhere. So that's what that's about. Now, in terms of electrification, I think that as North America, I think we kind of thought it was going to be a little easier than it really is. When you look at the plans of what it could be once it's complete, it's awesome. I mean, there's areas of sustainability, so ESG goals are going to be met. Improved traffic, so that's going to happen. Autonomous vehicles, it supports all of these things, but we're starting with fleets of buses, these big heavy duty vehicles. So your AWS trucks and all of these other trucks are going to go electric. Once that happens, you need to have depots that can actually support this. But now this ties into whether or not the transformer is a shared transformer or is it a dedicated transformer? Are there distributed energy resources sitting behind that you'll want to manage and monitor? But I definitely see a huge push, and this is the year that the funding gets released. You're going to see some real activity over the next 2 to 3 years. The one thing that I do caution everyone about is supply chain. Supply chain is still just that, supply chain, and there are long lead times for some of these, we'll say, utility grade transformers that are wanting to be used for the depots. So there's movement, but there are definitely hurdles that we still continue to have to overcome.
Thank you so much, Bill. And Rob, another sustainable development goal that you wanted to discuss is SDG 11, which kind of rolls right in with this whole intelligent infrastructure economic zones, is the sustainable cities and communities. And goal 11 is about making cities and human settlements more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Can you tell us how advanced technologies such as AI and IoT are making this a reality?
Gee, what can I say after Bill here on the same topic? But yeah, there's all stats. Bill can correct me. I've heard, when the built world buildings, all these skyscrapers, this world around us, I've seen stats saying they're responsible for up to 27% of carbon emissions. I've heard as high as 40%. I don't know what, it's all bad. Whichever one is right, it's in that range there, which is crazy. That's huge. But it turns out most people spend most of their time indoors, as it turns out. And so maybe it's not a surprise that that's where all the activity is happening. And so again, what are those emissions coming from? It's always a direct relationship to energy usage, right? You're using a lot of energy for something, and then you're going to create a lot of emissions as a result of it. Unless you're using, wind or solar or nuclear or something like that, right, for your energy source. And so, smart lighting, smart heating and cooling, which is also something you've seen you can do in your home, is something that needs to happen, at a large scale at giant office buildings and things like that. And so, what does IoT play a role in there? Well, what are the sensors? Proximity. Are people there? Temperature, light, UV light. We've all, even if you're not in the smartest building in the world, everybody I'm sure watching this has experienced walking into an office, a conference room, and the light turns on when they walk in, right? And then it turns off when they leave because there's motion detectors. And so using IoT sensors like that, just to where are people? Are people using this building? If not, or this portion of a building, there's this notion of sub-metering electricity for different parts of a building. Let's, depending on if it's summer or winter, let's throttle back the heating or cooling because there's not a lot of people there or there's nobody. Same with lighting. let's dim the lighting, turn off the lighting, things like that. And none of this is rocket science, which when it's not rocket science, you're like, well, we should be doing it everywhere, because sadly, Tiffany, this one doesn't even require AI in most cases. And so when it does it, when it's easy, at least in my mind, it feels like there's no excuse not to be doing it. We have heard numerous stories during COVID when everybody went to work from home, and all these skyscrapers and downtowns all over the country were going full speed ahead. Lights are on, heating's happening in the winter, air conditioning's in the summer, and nobody's in the building. And so just tons of unnecessary emissions are being put out there. So let's get smart about it, and this is low hanging fruit for us, and we should tackle it everywhere.
Thanks, Rob. That's a great point. I mean, I wonder how many of these large office buildings that are pretty vacant, if you look at some of the occupancy ratings, are still going with their traditional ways of heating and cooling. I mean, something to look at.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And Johannes, you recently wrote a great blog on AI being the new Steam, and you shared several examples of how smart cities are utilizing AIoT. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, Tiffany, AIoT is the cornerstone of smart sustainability. Smart sustainability is crucial for smart cities, particularly in managing scarce resources efficiently and responsibly. To put it bluntly, for a city, everything is a resource. People, air, water, energy, spaces, roads, finances, etc. And resources are always scarce. There are so many different ways smart cities can utilize AIoT. AIoT helps with resource optimization, pollution control, water management, sustainable agriculture, transportation, and mobility, and the list goes on. So AIoT helps cities being more innovative, and become more efficient.
Thanks, Johannes. And Bill, you touched on ESG, and we heard a lot about ESG last year, which for anyone that is unfamiliar with the term means environmental, social, and governance. But it also means taking measures to lower pollution and CO2 output, as well as reduce waste. And it also ties into having a diverse and inclusive workforce at the entry level and board of directors, apparently. So, Bill, can you tell us your thoughts on where we are with ESG expectations?
Well, I mean, there's not a city that I've seen yet that doesn't have some documented efforts as it relates to ESG. And just as every city is a little bit different, I expect to see different goals, different KPIs that they're measuring. I think that we're still early days in terms of implementation of these practices. What's really good is that we are fully aware, and you're starting to see numbers come out. So there's a level of transparency coming from cities as it relates to the community. And they're letting them know, here's what we plan to do. Here's what it looks like right now. And here's our objective and our goal at the end of the day. So you're starting to see a greater awareness and a greater impetus for actually putting it into practice. In terms of, like you mentioned, the pollution, just CO2 emissions, allergens. I mean, there are cities that are actually wanting to let the community know that the pollen count is very bad today. So if you are, highly allergic, don't go out. So I think that there's a real movement and an honest effort to deliver on every city's ESG goals as I've seen it so far.
I like that, Bill. I like that there's no one size fits all approach. I mean, here in Las Vegas, we get the dust warnings. Be careful, it's very dusty today, which usually you can tell. It is important that each city kind of approaches this in its own unique way. I'm sure people in rural communities don't really have to worry about the pollution as much as people in larger cities. So definitely not a one size fits all approach is probably best.
Absolutely.
And Rob, another SDG that you wanted to talk about is Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action. And how are IoT and AI used to combat climate change and its impacts?
Well, it goes without saying, of all the SDGs, climate action, climate change, global warming, that gets most of the headlines over all the rest of them. And so it's the stuff you hear people talking about all the time. Things are getting a little warmer out there. The most basic form of IoT, when we all first started with IoT, it was to do the simplest thing. It was remote monitoring. It was just inspection. Before we did anything super advanced, it was just inspection. I always like to just call it the Internet of inspection, because today without IoT, it's always good to bring out what is it like if you don't have IoT, because that helps illuminate for people what it's like. When we have to, every company in the world has some portion of their employees, as well as governmental agencies, that they, on some periodic routine, they have to go inspect things. I got to walk around an oil refinery looking at gauges. What's the PSI? I got to go look at all kinds of, people are taking readings. People are taking logs. You always hear me joking about, hey, you're just competing against a guy with a clipboard. The whole world is inspecting things all the time. Oil and gas, people are driving out to drilling sites in West Texas to do methane readings, because they've got to do their reporting for ESG, to the EPA and things like that. So what does that look like without IoT? People are walking, they are driving a pickup truck, they are flying cars, they are in boats, they're taking all kinds of transportation to go somewhere remote to just take a reading. And what do? They write it down, and then they go back to the office and they kind of type it into their system of record, maybe SAP or whatever, I don't know. And it seems crazy to me. My earliest days of IoT, well, not my earliest days because I'm really old and I was doing this in the 90s, but when things started getting hot, let's say after 2010, I remember reading an article, I think it was related to a Shell oil company and drilling operations they had in Africa. And they talked about how they saved $10 million a year because it turns out people were flying from Texas to Nigeria to go do that inspection and do a bunch of stuff. And then they replaced it with IoT sensors and devices and this magical thing we invented a while ago called wireless. And all of a sudden, you didn't have to do that anymore. When people ask me, well, how long is it going to take for me to get ROI on my IoT investment? It sounds really complicated. My answer is instantaneously if you're going after the right thing. If you do what IoT does best, which is inspection, it's instantaneous return on investment. As soon as you get it going, a person's not flying there, driving there, walking there, whatever. So do that. So what are all those emissions that you're going to cut? It could be anywhere from 10 to 40% of emissions are cut because you're not flying, you're not driving, you're not going to places to do these remote inspections. You wouldn't believe the stories I've heard about the things that people have to do to find out and do reporting. And all this can be fully automated. That's why we invented sensors and devices and wireless continuous monitoring. That's why my company's called Continuous. I'm a big fan of just continuous monitoring. It's easy, it's cheap, it's real time, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it's going to cut emissions dramatically. So there you have it.
Great. Thank you, Rob. I mean, I'm still a little old fashioned. I think having someone go out and check with a clipboard occasionally could be good for multiple use cases. Maybe it's not leaking where they have a sensor, but maybe a water leak's happening somewhere else. It's good to have checks and balances to some degree, but I definitely see your point that there is a lot of ROI to be found just from reducing the amount of traffic and people traveling and those emissions for sure. And Johannes, in order to execute many of these different green initiatives and sustainable initiatives that we've been talking about today, there will need to be some education and workforce development. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there are two aspects to this, Tiffany. On the one hand, sustainability impacts all industries and sectors, I would say, which necessitates the development of a sustainable curriculum that's being implemented in the schools and in the colleges. So that's one development and workforce training that needs to happen. On the other hand, sustainability is spawning new industries. Take, for example, the renewable energy industry. The International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, reported that renewable energy employment has reached about 12 million jobs worldwide. And that's just one example. So that in itself justifies the development of entirely new curricula for the various functions in the renewable energy industry. So those are two examples. I think we need a continuous update on curricula simply to keep the sustainability drive going.
Thanks, Johannes. And when we look at education and workforce development, I've been following you, Bill. I've been all over what you've been talking about, and I saw that you've been talking about simplification and doing more with less. And in order for this to be effective, it needs to be embedded into the foundation of AI. And can you tell us what efforts are being made to ensure that AI is developed with sustainability and green strategies top of mind?
Well, I think the first thing is we were all enamored by the whole AI thing, and it can do this and it can do that. And so someone said, "Well, wait a minute. Look at how much energy is being consumed by training a single AI model." And that everyone woke up then and said, "Well, okay, wait a minute. We have to fix that." We don't want to toss AI out and say AI is bad because it's a gross consumer of energy. We want to be more energy efficient about how we build our AI models, how we deploy our AI models, and what return we're getting on those AI models. So I think that you're starting to see two different sides of it. There's the let's be more efficient in the data centers and the storage and compute that we're using so that we can reduce the amount of energy. Then there's on the other side of it, you're starting to see much more of the AI solutions being used at the edge, and being small, not being these large models that you have today, and seeking to deliver predictions based on what they've learned over a period of time. So I think that realistically doing more with less, and I think when people hear that, they think, oh, you're going to be taking jobs away. No, it's a reskilling, it's an upskilling. There's a reduced need for truck rolls. There's a reduced need for all of these other things that we're just so used to because it was standard operating procedure. If there's a fault, send somebody out in a truck and go do something about that. But to Rob's point, if you have these sensors that are out there and you've detected a leak, you can understand where the genesis of that leak was, not just where that spot is, and have a more targeted approach as to how you remediate that. Likewise, if you can reduce the number of vehicles that have to be on the road at any given time, you're naturally reducing your CO2. So let's be smart about how we triage other challenges and issues that we see, and start to work smarter as opposed to throwing bodies at the solutions.
Thanks, Bill. And I especially liked earlier when you were talking about, not just throwing out old infrastructure, that they're redoing it and modifying it. And I think that kind of goes right in alignment with doing more with less. Is how do we salvage some of these materials and even vehicles? Can we make them electric rather than just throwing them out and then putting in new electric vehicles? How do we truly do more with less?
Yes, exactly.
And Rob, the final sustainable development goal that you wanted to discuss today is SDG 15, Life on Land. How are AI and IoT used to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainability, manage forests, combat desertification, and halt the reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss? That's a big question, but
that's a mouthful. Yeah.
Well, on land.
Yes, as it turns out, we all live on land, except for ex-submarine or Navy people like me. And so, well, let's zoom in, because there's so many different use cases across all these SDGs, as you can imagine. I've been compiling them over the years. But let's just zoom in on deforestation, actually, for instance. And so forests are home to about 80% of all animals, plants, things like that in the world. And apparently about 1.5, 1.6 billion people around the world depend on forests for their livelihood. The downside is about 20 million acres of forests are lost or destroyed every year. It just happens. Obviously we always hear about the Amazon, right? And so, what can we do about that? In fact, when I think of the Amazon, I've often heard it described as the lungs of the earth. obviously photosynthesis, plants create the oxygen that we breathe, and they breathe in our CO2. You've heard of programs like 1 trillion trees to try to, there's all these efforts that we're doing concurrently, renewable energies, or saving energy, reducing emissions, planting trees, things like that, right? To capture CO2. And so we want more trees, not less. And so what can IoT do about that? What are the sensors? Oh, acoustic cameras. I'm listening for chainsaws. I'm looking for people who are in places where they shouldn't be, chopping down trees, for instance, things like that. And so, like all these things, you've got KPIs for every one of these scenarios. What's green look like? What's yellow look like? What's red look like? Green means everything's great, nothing bad's happening. So what's the automation? Take no action. But in fact, what's yellow look like? I'm starting to see people who are in an area where they don't belong, and maybe they're breaking out their chainsaws, but they haven't done anything yet. Maybe that's yellow. That's a warning light. And then red, the bad stuff is happening. They're chopping down trees if it's illegal logging, right? If it's legal, they can do what they want. And so what's red look like? Well, the action is to dispatch authorities, right? Police, whatever the authorities in that particular region, that country, that municipality, to go take things like that. Because remember, you got to, connect, you got to collect the data, you got to analyze, and you got to take action for all this to make sense. And so, simple, keeping it simple with just the streaming analytics is just always comparing actual data to KPIs. This is what good looks like. This is what normal looks like. This is what bad looks like. And this all happens. I'm a big fan of what I used to talk about when I was talking about streaming analytics versus machine learning, this notion of hot path and cold path analytics. And so there's the stuff that's happening in real time, and you take action as it's happening. And then there's stuff that's happening over time, because when we do AI and machine learning, that's historical data. Those are based on data sets that you train on over time, and you see what's normal over time and what looks abnormal. And then you apply new data to that to do an inference, right? And so it's important to do both for every use case, to see things in the moment and then predict things as they're happening and coming down the road. So let's watch out for those trees. They're helping us.
Amen. I'm a big fan of trees, so let's keep those going.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've explored land, and later in the summit, we're going to hear about what's happening in the sea, as we've got a session about preserving our oceans, and that's through plastic reduction. So Toby Lowe's going to be on later to tell us more about that. But Johannes, what about space? We did our space tech webinar. We talked about space and a lot of our summits. Can you share with us some of the different green space initiatives that you're seeing?
Sure, Tiffany. So talking about space, first of all, as we expand our activities in space, we're launching more rockets. We need to implement sustainable practices because that becomes critical to, for example, prevent space debris getting out of control. Also, and that has an impact not just on the orbital environment, but ultimately the debris will come back down to Earth. So that's one aspect of it. Second aspect of space is we have a ton of satellites in space now, and satellite technologies play a pivotal role in monitoring Earth's ecosystems and managing our natural resources. That ties into the deforestation that Rob was talking about just now. So satellites provide critical data on climate change, deforestation, and ocean health. And then third, life support systems developed for space missions can actually be used here on Earth. For example, water recycling technologies used in space are highly efficient, capable of purifying and reusing over 90% of wastewater, and could be adapted for use in water-scarce regions here on Earth. And last, but certainly not least, space farming is emerging as a critical area in a study of sustainability, and we need it for further space exploration, of course. But it's not only used for space travel, it also has potential benefits here on Earth. So techniques such as hydroponics and aeroponics, which are critical for the space farming, will allow farming without soil and with significantly reduced water usage. Those are being tested in space and for space exploration, and they are directly transferable to Earth.
Thanks, Johannes. And while I'm inquisitive about what's happening in space, I always like to remind myself and anyone watching that Earth is first priority. Let's take care of our home planet. And then, if things really go haywire, we can experiment with going somewhere else. But let's take care of our home, Earth first.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this opening panel discussion. We've got lots of amazing sessions throughout the day, so be sure to log into the platform. You can chat with us, network, ask questions, and we appreciate you being a part of our growing community. And thank you so much, Johannes, Bill, Rob. We appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. This is great. Good stuff.
Thank you. Have a great day and enjoy the rest